Hi, I'm Stewart Friedman. I am the director of the Wharton Work-Life Integration Project here at the Wharton School and professor in the management department. And I'm thrilled to welcome today Marci Alboher, who is here on the Penn campus celebrating her 25th reunion. She is the author of the Encore Career Handbook, How to Make a Living and a Difference in the Second Half of Life, which was released earlier this year. And she is a leading authority on the changing face of work and is vice president at Encore.org, which is a nonprofit that is devoted to making it easier for the millions of people who are pursuing second acts for the greater good. Welcome, Marci. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here, Stu.
Let's start off with just some basic definitions. What is an Encore career and what is Encore.org?
Great. Okay, good place to start. So an Encore career is a second or third act that combines personal meaning with social impact and continued income. And continued income is an important part of that definition. Of course, for some people, the continued income is optional. If you've made enough money to take care of yourself for the rest of your life, your Encore career may not be a paid piece of work, but for the majority of people, it is. And Encore.org is a national nonprofit that's been in this game close to a decade now, that is trying to pave the way for the growing number of people who want to have Encore careers, who want to plan not for a leisure-based retirement, but for a later stage of work that has some impact in the world, some positive impact in the world. And we do that through a variety of programs. We could get into all of those if you'd like, but the most famous one is the Purpose Prize.
Yes.
We give out $100,000 prizes to social entrepreneurs over the age of 60. So the idea of that is to change what you think about innovation and aging. By elevating these role models of people who are innovating in huge ways in the years that we used to think of as the time of life where you start receding away rather than continuing to be engaged.
Could you give us a recent example of a Purpose Prize winner and why they earned
sure.
it?
Sure. We're sitting here in Philadelphia, so someone from Philadelphia comes to mind, Barbara Allen, who was a museum administrator who had taken off some time to raise her kids, and she was always in design and the arts, and she got involved in a project where she was asked, along with her son, to help decorate the Philadelphia building, a school superintendent building. And they decided what they wanted to do is they were asked to bring the images of children into this building so that people would have a sense of who they were serving. So her son had done a lot of work. He'd worked in printing and design with large-scale printing, and they came up with this idea to get a treasure trove of children's art that was created in schools, and to blow that up into these giant works of art that could be used to decorate the hallways. And it was so successful, this project, that an idea was born. And she said she was really concerned about the budget cuts for art supplies and art programming in public schools in Philadelphia. So they came up with this model where they created what she calls student philanthropists. So the students make art, and they blow these pieces up like she had done for that one project with her son. Corporations buy the art from the students and decorate their walls, and all the money goes to replenishing those art budgets in the schools that have had these budget cuts. And it's a sustainable business model. The corporations are feeding the money in to fund this venture. It's called Fresh Artists. So anyway, it's replicable. It's something that people are looking at all over the country as an interesting model to help inner city schools that are struggling. And it creates this sense of philanthropy with the students who are actually, and they get to see their art on the wall of these companies. Fantastic. And the companies get this great.
Everyone wins.
Yeah, everybody wins. It's a community project.
So that's a great example.
Great example.
There are others that you probably write about in your book that I'm sure would be of great interest. And if we have time, we'll get into a couple more of those. But let's step back and looking at the big picture, why is there so much interest in this topic now?
Right. So I would say there's a few things that have converged in the time that we're living. So demography is a big part of it. We've heard about the gray tsunami, right? The aging wave of baby boomers coming down the pipe. They've been called the greedy geezers that are coming to deplete Social Security, right? So 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day, and it's going to be like that for the next 20 years or so. We're going to, I think the year is 2050, we're going to have more people over 65 than under 30. I mean, this is a very big demographic shift. At the same time, we have kind of a longevity shift, too. And it's not so much that we're living longer. We are living longer technically by a few years, but we're living the period of life that's this extended midlife from your 50s to your 70s. If you maintain your health, those are years of vitality and engagement that used to be years that weren't that useful to people. And that could be a pretty long period that's opening up. So this work was really pioneered by the founder of the organization I now work for, Marci Friedman. And his
No
vision.
relation.
Yeah. Right, and spelled different. He's EED.
Spelled incorrectly.
Yeah. So his idea was, rather than viewing this aging population as a problem, right? It's going to drain our national resources. It's going to make it harder for young people, all of these things. What if instead we said, we have this great wave of talent and experience that could be applied to solving the world's biggest social problems. So what if we looked at this aging population as a resource rather than a problem, as a legion of problem solvers, really, rather than a problem? So that's the genesis.
A legion of problem solvers.
Yeah, a cadre, an army. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is figure out, so how do we take that idea and turn it into reality and mobilize all the people who want to do this Encore work?
So is this only about people who are moving from the private sector to the nonprofit sector, or what about those people who have spent their lives and careers already, doing work of service?
Yes, like people in education, for example. Yeah. No, it's not just about people who are sector switchers. It's about but there is something that happens to you after you've been doing any kind of work for 20 or 30 years, where you get this need or this interest in shaking it up a little. I mean, that's not uniform. Many people figure out how to shake it up within the confines of what they do. But I've now interviewed hundreds of people at this life stage. And what happens is, you get to a point, you've been in the classroom maybe, public school teacher for 30 years, and you're ready to get off your feet, but you are not done with education. So that's where we see these people who go into education policy reform, or taking all those years of on-the-ground knowledge and figuring out, what's wrong with the system that I'm now in the position to see and change and dedicate all that time to? Or how can I mentor the next generation of people who are coming into my field who need the knowledge that I've amassed? So we see it happening across the board, of people wanting to have an impact, but in a new way, even if they feel like their whole life has been about having a social contribution in the world.
How did you get into this?
Yeah, so I got into it both personally, a little pre-Encore in terms of kind of slightly younger than the people that we look at, but I'm always thinking about the future, so I've got self-interest here in mind. But I also came at this as a journalist, so I had a few career reinventions myself. In my first career, I was a corporate lawyer. And after about 9 years, I realized I was having a really bad fit with my organization. And this totally relates to the work you do, Stu, in that I was having a values clash with the work that I was doing. I felt like I was representing companies that I didn't believe in and practices that I couldn't support. And I kind of had a crisis of conscience. But at the same time, I also realized that rather than just reinventing the law was a bad fit for me. And I needed to reinvent in a kind of bigger way. So I left the law.
That must have been very, very challenging for you personally.
It was challenging, and it took a long time. It wasn't an overnight transition. And even though I was young, I was in my 30s when I made that first transition. And I quit my law job, and I tried to become a writer, which was what I originally wanted to do. I'd been an English major when I went to Penn. I could never figure out how to turn that into paid work. I hadn't discovered journalism in those days. I just didn't go on a natural progression. So I decided I wanted to become a writer, and I went back and I took some classes, little classes at community centers. And I took one class at the New School and one at a local JCC in New York City where I live. And within 2 classes, I started publishing pieces. I got a piece in the New York Times after my first class, and I said, wow, I've had more professional satisfaction out of this one article I just got published than anything I'd done in the 9 years previously. So long story short, I spent a couple of years trying to turn that early kind of sign of promise into really what was going to be a sustainable career. And it took a long time, and it wasn't easy. And I had to find new mentors, and I had to learn from a bunch of 20-year-olds who were already way ahead of me in this game. And
well, that's probably a major issue for a lot of Encore kinds
exactly.
of
I was seeing
switches,
the very
right?
things I now report on, like that you have to find mentors who are younger than you, who understand how the world works now in the world that you want to break into.
And accept that.
Yes.
Right? 'Cause I'm sure a lot of people resist that sort of mentoring from people younger than them.
Right, but that's the best way to kind of stay in the game and stay relevant is to figure out how to have intergenerational relationships in the workplace. We all need to figure out that in the workplace. How can young people learn from older people, and how can older people learn from younger people? So for the next 10 years, I wrote as a journalist, mostly for the New York Times, but for many other publications as well, about kind of workplace trends and the changing face of work and how the world is constantly changing, and we are constantly changing to keep up and stay relevant. And so you're in this space, so you know the kinds of things I write about, how we can combine work and life in better ways than we've been doing, how organizations and people can be smarter and more effective about those kinds of things, demographic changes that were shifting the way people work. And in the course of that work, I started to learn about what was happening at Encore.org, which used to be called Civic Ventures. Right. And I reviewed Marc Friedman's 2 books ago. He wrote a book called Encore, which really put this big idea out in the world. And I covered that book for the New York Times, and I got to know him. And he became one of these trusted sources, a guy I went to whenever I wrote about social entrepreneurship and baby boomers and demographic trends and social purpose work. And I wrote so many pieces on this that it became like a little mini beat for me. This Encore stuff really intrigued me. And in the wake of all of that, I had a column in a blog for the Times called Shifting Careers. And in 2008, in the midst of the recession and the media implosion, the New York Times canceled my column and blog. And here I was, kind of writing about the recession and how it's impacting people. And suddenly, I'm going to have to think about my own next steps. And I was a little older than I was the last time, and I wasn't sure my skills were as good as the 20-year-olds coming into the workplace. And I was really trying to think about, how can I continue to have an impact? And I wasn't sure that the media was going to be the best place for me to do that. And I wrote a piece about this for my blog. I wrote the parting column on what it's like to be a workplace writer who's out of work.
I remember that.
You remember
it?
It got a lot of response. And one of the first people who responded to me was Marc Friedman from Encore.org. And he wrote me a note, and he said, I'm really interested in talking to you about your future plans. And we started what I call like one of those professional courtships that goes on for a long time. And we spent the next year. I continued to work in journalism. I got a blog at Yahoo where I continued to write about the new economy. The always new economy. That's our permanent name for what we work in now, right? And eventually, Mark and I decided that I should come over to Encore.org and lead a piece of our work that was all about kind of helping people better understand this idea and really helping people make the steps from thinking this is a good idea for society to figuring out, and how do we make this happen for ourselves? How do we create a career that's going to sustain us for 50 years and not for 30 years like we used to have?
Let's get a little further into that, because
Sure.
I'm sure a lot of our readers and viewers are interested in some of the practical aspects of this, which the book is just filled with. So, for example, what do you say to someone who feels like, well, I'm just too old to do this? I've already had a lot. I'm tired. I don't have really the energy. I mean, I'd like to do something new, but can I really retool?
Yeah.
What's the advice you have for people who have that mindset?
Right. So there's this Zen concept of beginner's mind, right? This way that you learn something new with the eyes of a beginner, and it's actually a pretty exciting thing. So I think we all have the capacity to continue to learn, and truthfully, if you become a lifelong learner, you will keep that skill from atrophying. So it's a pretty important part of aging, to learn how to learn new things and to exercise that muscle often. And the truth is, it's something that you have to do if you want to figure out how to continue to have impact in the world, how to stay relevant, and how to stay in the game. And I was just at my 25th reunion, and I think our class was like at the beginning of people who are just dealing with this. We all see 50 right ahead of us. We're thinking, wow, that's 25 years of more work I can do, and I'm not done. I could have a career that is as long as what I've been doing for the last 20 or 30 years.
Perhaps longer.
Perhaps longer. So, and I found people all over my class who were going back to school, who were embarking on master's programs, who are going back to for a certificate somewhere, for an online program. I met this woman, and she's a classic example, who had stayed home for 20 years raising her kids, who got interested, based on a lot of what we're seeing climate-wise in especially the East Coast lately where we live. She got interested in coastal erosion, and she's going back to school to learn about coastal erosion so that she can work in urban planning to help prevent some of the disasters that we're going to be facing in coming years. It is a field she never even knew existed 25 years ago when she first planned. And she was saying that back at Penn, she barely took a science class. Like she was interested in science, but she went in a whole different, she was a Wharton person. She hadn't even thought about this field as something that could interest her.
So what role do universities play in this? One of the things that we're doing here at Wharton is investing in lifelong learning in a significant way. How does that play into the Encore movement?
I think universities are going to be a huge part of this, and all of higher education. We've done work with from community colleges up through Wharton and Harvard Business School. Like, we believe that higher education is the key to helping people through this, because people are going to go to places in their community, they're going to go to their alma maters, and they're going to go to the name brand in the field they want to learn about because they're going to have to retool. So it's a great market opportunity for higher education to be thinking about how do you serve both your alumni through their own life course, and how do you serve the greater population who want to learn about the areas that you have the name brand program so that you could be attracting the public. So I believe my vision is that the way executive education is now so standard, Encore education will be just as standard, a buzzword. So the Encore is, how can I retool for a second act that's going to have a greater good impact? And you're going to look at all the schools that have the programs for the thing you want to do, but you're going to want to make sure that they know how to serve somebody of your generation. So are they going to help you with the tech support you might need if you haven't been in the classroom for 20 years? Are they going to be as flexible as you want to be? So executive education was built around serving the corporate employee who had certain particular needs. The Encore market may have some of those needs in common, but they're going to have a whole different set of needs. And I think the smartest players in higher ed are going to recognize what those needs are to make sure that they deliver the product in a way that the Encore population is going to want to learn.
Very important advice.
Yeah.
What about age discrimination? Does that still exist in the workplace and in society? And how does that play into the Encore movement?
Yeah, so age discrimination really does exist. And I have to say, even sitting here, we should try to catch ourselves if we are saying things like, those younger folks are more tech savvy, or we all kind of have these stereotypes that we parrot because we think this is the way the world works. But what's interesting is as people who are more experienced stay in the workplace, it's going to be much more common to see people of all ages playing roles in the workplace. Education is interesting because I think it's a place where it's a little comfortable. We have respect for age and experience and wisdom in education the way it doesn't exist in some other fields. And education is a really hot Encore field. Another hot Encore field that really values age and experience is healthcare. And healthcare is where all the jobs and opportunities are right now. It is the sector that we see the most steady continued growth, quarter after quarter. So what's interesting in healthcare is there are all these jobs and roles for which having lived through some health issues of your own, having been a caregiver perhaps, are really, really useful and make people marketable when they go into the marketplace. So yes, ageism exists. But the best way to combat it is to find sectors where age is appreciated and wisdom is welcome and experience is valued, but also to dispel those stereotypes. You've acknowledged at Wharton, you've written some great pieces about this. I was reading something by Peter Capelli about combating these myths we have. There's this myth that you hire an older worker and they're not going to stay. And the data all shows that older workers dig in. That's what they're used to. They're used to finding a job and staying there and being committed. They do not expect to flit around from one employer to another. There's another myth that they're more expensive because of health care. But the truth is, a lot of older workers, their kids are off their health care plans. They're less, they can be less expensive than having younger workers to support. So and we all, when we're in a position to hire, we have to be thinking about what does it mean to have an intergenerational team as a new kind of diversity to look at. So building teams that have the enthusiasm of youth and the experience that age can bring, we all have to start thinking about that.
So we're going to have to wrap up here.
Yeah.
What's the most important thing you'd want to convey to people who are interested in pursuing an Encore career, but they just don't know how to get started?
Yeah. So I want to leave with two thoughts. So the how to get started is there's a two-part process. The first is there's something you have to do in your head first, right? You have to figure out, where you are in your life and what you're looking for. So you focus a lot on people who are on the throes of their mid-career, where they're kind of at that sweet spot. Well, what can you be doing to add more social impact to where you are right now, if that's where you're sitting? And if you're planning for the future, if you're a few years off from what would be the time where you're ready to make a shift, what could you do now to lay the foundation? Could you be exploring what interests you? Could you be taking some courses on the side? Could you be connecting with other people who are interested in this idea? Could you be volunteering more or doing some pro bono consulting for organizations you care about? So that's kind of something you should be doing now. And then I just also want to make sure that people recognize that this just isn't about you and your own reinvention. You have a possibility, if you get into this Encore idea, to be a part of changing the world for future generations. So the pioneers who are figuring out how to have a really big impact in the later years of their career are going to be helping to create a whole new kind of paradigm for what work looks like, the way the pioneers of the women's movement did it in the 60s. I mean, I've talked to a lot of women who are in Encore careers now who were trailblazers in the 1960s as the first women at work, who are now trailblazers as the first women to have Encores in the workplace. So I think this is a really interesting and exciting time to be a part of.
Marci, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Author of the Encore Career Handbook, How to Make a Living and a Difference in the Second Half of Life, which is filled with all kinds of wonderful examples and practical advice for those who are thinking about or in the midst of or helping other people to think through and act on making that next step. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stu.